Please take a seat. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our first CEO lecture of the year. For the freshmen here, this is your first CEO lecture ever in our series. So I just wanted to say 30 seconds about that. This series has been running since the founding of the school 10 years ago. And the idea behind it was for you to get direct access to people who basically are at the top of their game, people who exemplify what we are teaching you here at the Busch School. So people who are living in faith, succeeding greatly in business, and so that you can hear from them their own personal story, ask them questions. There'll be time afterwards for you to ask questions in general, and then we'll have, once we close, you can come up and ask them kind of one-on-one questions as well. So you're all very welcome. I'm going to now introduce our speaker, but before I do that, I want to introduce two special friends of the Busch School, members of our board of visitors, Steve and Marianne Means, if you could just stand up, and their daughter Stephanie, who's visiting. Stephanie, stand up. You probably caught the last name. If you've had a class or you currently have a class in the Means family classroom, you know who to thank for that. So here they are. So our speaker tonight, our CEO lecturer, is Mr. David Haley. David is President Emeritus of HBK Capital Management. So it's an investment management firm managing several hedge funds, headquartered in Dallas with offices in New York and London. Mr. Haley has just retired from HBK this past December, otherwise we probably couldn't come here. And he was 27 years with the firm, including the last 14 as the president of the firm. Before joining HBK, he was a partner at Andrews & Kurth, a law firm, where he practiced corporate securities law from 1986 to 1994. He was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, earned an A.B. magna cum laude in social studies from Harvard University, a J.D. from SMU, where he served as editor-in-chief of the Law Review. He has been married to his wife Lori for 36 years. They have 4 grown children and 2 grandchildren. He was raised in the Presbyterian Church, but Mr. Haley converted to Catholicism in 2015, so fairly recently. Mr. Haley serves on numerous not-for-profit boards, has received multiple awards, but I will get out of the way and hand you now over to our speaker. Please give a warm Busch School welcome to Mr. David Haley.
Thank you, Dean Avella, and thank all of you for being here. And I want to thank or blame Marianne Means for this invitation. Marianne and I serve on the board of the Augustine Institute, a graduate school in Denver, Colorado. And a little shout out for the Augustine Institute, if y'all do not have the Formed app or the Amen app on your phones, your permission to pull your phones out now and download those 2 apps while I'm talking, because they're great resources for faithful Catholics to enrich their spiritual lives on these 2 resources. But Marianne, thank you for recommending me to Dean Avella. It's been a pleasure to be here all day. I got some wonderful time with Dean Avella, and I got to speak with some amazing students who were part of the Cardinal Fund before this, and it's a great pleasure to be here. It's also great to be at a great university in a great city. I had the privilege in the summer of 1981 of spending the summer in Washington, D.C., working for David Pryor, who was a Democratic senator from the state of Arkansas. And Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and that summer I was working late in the Russell Senate office building one night on Model United Nations. Anybody involved with Model UN here? No? Okay, great. So I was writing a paper on Democratic Kampuchea, and Reagan went on television and made this direct appeal to the American public to call their congressmen and senators right then to support a piece of legislation that he had asked Congress to approve. And I'm there alone, and the phone banks lit up, and I just take call after call from voters in the state of Arkansas who are saying, I know David Pryor is a Democrat, but tell him I want him to vote for President Reagan's legislation when it's submitted next week. And so it was a great experience the whole summer. but it was also just great witness to democracy in action, the way it's supposed to work. And I know the city and Congress are seen in less esteemed terms today, but I would say that's just a product of the quality of the individuals in it. Y'all have the ability to change that. So I think this is a great city. I had a great summer here. It's great to be back here to speak to all of you. If someone had told me that summer that I would be speaking in my future to business students at Catholic University of America as part of the CEO Speak series, I think I would have been deeply skeptical because I was not a business student and I was not Catholic and I did not aspire to be a CEO. I came late to business and the Catholic faith. To be more specific, my first career was as a lawyer, and I entered the business world, the investing world, at age 33. And I didn't even dream of becoming a CEO until about 2 weeks before it happened in the summer of 2007. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And I began going to Catholic Mass for the first time in 1984 when I met a cute co-ed named Lori in Texas. She was Catholic and said, if you want to date me, you have to go to Mass. And so I began going to Mass, but it took me 3 decades before I converted to the Catholic faith in 2015. I'll talk more about that as well. Dean Abella suggested that at the outset, I start with what is a hedge fund, because not everybody may know that term, even though it's in the press. So, 30 seconds. In the wake of the stock market crash of 1929, Congress passed 4 seminal pieces of legislation. And the 4th of those was the Investment Company Act of 1940. And the goal of that legislation was to protect small investors and ensure that never again would they lose all of their money in a stock investment that was overseen by the SEC. So this act created what we now know as mutual funds, but legally are known as registered investment funds. And the good news about a registered investment fund is you can take money from anyone. But the condition of taking money from anyone is that you cannot be concentrated, you cannot be levered, and you cannot sell short. Because all 3 of those things can cause you to lose all of your money. Other funds that are not registered can take money only from sophisticated investors, is defined. And what you get for giving up on the retail investor is you can be concentrated, you can be levered, and you can sell short. So a hedge fund is really just a short name for an unregistered investment fund that can do all of those things. So it can potentially lose all of your money very quickly. Okay? So, thank you for the suggestion. As mentioned, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I worked very hard and earned the opportunity to go to Harvard. And I loved being at Harvard every single day. But I worked very hard there for 2 reasons. The first was my father was paying a lot of tuition, right? Some of you all may relate to that. So you should honor your parents anyway, but you should especially honor them and their sacrifice by working hard and making the most of your time here. But more importantly, I felt like I believed in God. I believed I was created by God for a purpose not yet known to me. And it was my challenge and opportunity every day to get the most out of every experience. And somehow I'd gotten this chance to go to Harvard. I should get the most out of it. So long before I had learned what an examination of conscience was, every night at Harvard, I would go to bed and look at my day planner and see, did I do everything I said I was going to do today? Did I get the most out of this place today? And what's tomorrow look like? How can I get the most out of tomorrow? And I saw in a 2017 presentation in this forum, Carly Fiorina quoted her mother as saying, who you are is God's gift to you. What you become and what you make of that is your gift to God. And that's a succinct and powerful expression of the same idea. One of my favorite books, and I know I'm rambling a bit here, but bear with me, one of my favorite books is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. And it's about a young King Arthur. And he's mentored by Merlin, the wizard. Merlin travels through time backwards, so he knows the young Arthur's destiny. And he puts Arthur through a series of transformations. He turns him into a fish, into a hawk, into an ant, each of which is designed to teach Arthur a lesson that Merlin knows he's going to need in the future when he's king. And it's consistent with my faith, and it's very helpful for me to approach every situation as if there's an all-knowing being who's put me exactly where I am, right here today. And I may not know my destiny, and I may not know the reason, but my job is to get the most out of that transformation as I can. And I encourage all of you, it's my perception that it's a minority of college students, even high achievers, who fully appreciate what the opportunity is to spend 4 years immersed in just educating yourself at a great university. This is an amazing place, a great opportunity. I applaud you for everything you've done to get here, but I encourage you to exploit it fully. So, at Harvard, it was a competition of ideas. I studied the early Christian church, Tibetan Buddhism. I took quantum physics for poets, because I didn't have the maths to take the real thing. But my main passion was moral philosophy. What's the right ordering of men and women in relation to one another? What's the way to order a just society? And it was fantastic. But it did not immediately make me employable. So my next stop was law school. And I was lucky enough to earn a full tuition scholarship to SMU Law School in Dallas. That's what took me to Texas. I'll be brief on the law school segment and just say, I loved it. I know you all have friends in law school and they all talk about how hard it is and how much they hate it. Well, they're haters. Law school is amazing. The rule of law is the bedrock of individual liberty everywhere. Just look around the world. If the courts are the puppet of the executive branch, there's no individual liberty. If the courts are independent of the executive branch in authority, there is individual liberty. And it's the rule of law that makes that so. And I love studying our Constitution, which is an amazing, I think, divinely inspired document. I love studying the separation of powers. The geek in me, I still read Supreme Court opinions, including all 4 of the opinions in the recent Dodd's decision. So if any of you are thinking about that path, don't let your friends and the haters discourage you. I think it's an amazing foundation, including if you want to go into business. But the best thing about law school is that I was introduced on a blind date to glory. I'll let that go. Next stop out of law school is you want to go get a job at a big law firm. And that's what I did. And it's basically an apprenticeship. You know, in the 1700s, you might apprentice yourself to a blacksmith and agree to work for them, basically for food, for 7 years, and in return, they would teach you their trade. Well, that was my deal in slightly more glamorous terms with the law firm. I worked for them for 7.5 years, and at the end of that, they said I was valuable and they made me a partner. What did I do in those 7.5 years? I was a corporate and securities lawyer. It basically meant I helped companies raise money in the public and private markets. What does that mean? Well, any of you have a toll tag in your car? Well, the company that invented the toll tag is called Amtech, and I helped take them public. If you drive down the street and you see the wires, the electricity wires, every few blocks you'll see a transformer. It's a big barrel at the top of the pole. It's what changes the voltage from high voltage to the lower voltage as it goes into your house. Those generate a lot of heat. Well, they're filled with oil to dissipate that heat. What happens to that oil? It becomes highly toxic. So what do you do with that? You have to incinerate it. So I raised money for a hazardous waste incinerator. Sugar refiner. Anybody from Texas? There's a town outside of Houston called Sugar Land. It's called Sugar Land because it has, I think, North America's largest sugar refinery here. And I learned that your powdered sugar comes from two forms. It can come from sugar cane, or it can come from beet sugar. So instead of going to work for one company, I basically got to work and look into lots of companies because I was helping them raise money. And I had to understand their businesses well enough to describe them. It was really good work. I enjoyed it. But the theme, and at a high level, it was a success because I went there to make partner and I made partner. But I want to be genuine with you for a minute, all day, but particularly this minute, and say the theme of this part of my life was man proposes, but God disposes. Because it wasn't at all easy. I chose this law firm because there was one partner I had identified, and I had lots of offers. This one partner who I thought was going to be the mentor to me for the rest of my professional career. Well, you know already where this goes, right? I'd been at the firm 90 days, and this partner left for a private equity firm. So I said, okay, I can rebound from that. I will become friends and develop relationships with vice presidents at all these investment banks where we were doing deals. And when those vice presidents get promoted to managing director, I'll be their favorite lawyer and we will prosper together. That's a good plan, a solid plan, right? Well, there's a big recession in 1991. It particularly hit Texas hard because it was centered on oil and gas and energy prices. And it in turn affected the real estate market. All my vice president friends lost their jobs in about 90 days. And shortly thereafter, most of the lawyers I worked with in the small Dallas office of this Houston law firm lost their jobs. My law firm said, you got to move to Houston. So my wife and I picked up and moved to Houston. And to her credit, she said, David, that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. But we were in a dream home, nice little neighborhood, we had 2 kids, we thought that was going to be our life. And that just wasn't God's plan. So we moved to Houston. And a couple of years later, I became a partner. We began trying to build a life there. So there's a lot of adversity, even when nominally from the outside you're achieving success. And you have to decide how you're going to respond to that. As Christians, we're supposed to exhibit faith, hope, and love. And others are supposed to know us by our joy. Well, there were a lot of days I couldn't get to the joy part, right? Like I wasn't modeling that particularly well. But I did maintain faith, hope, and love. And just had faith that there was better days ahead. I went to Mass here today. The priest was wonderful. But it's the feast day of St. John Chrysostom, and he said one marvelous thing he admired about that saint was, let's see if I can get the words right, he had an invincible confidence in the providence of God. That's it's really good, because when you're going through the dark patch, that invincible confidence in the providence of God can see you through. So I've worked 7.5 years to become partner in this law firm. Why am I not still there? Because I got a call from a college classmate. So, look to your left, look to your right, look in front of you, look behind you. There's a college classmate you're sitting close to, and who's the person that when you start your own company, you're going to say, Susan, from back in college, would be the perfect next player on the team I'm trying to build. Or who's the person that's going to call you because you're the right person for their team? That's how it works. It's who you know. That's not all that matters, because if you don't bring anything to the equation, they're not going to call you. So study hard and do well. But it was a call from a college classmate. And he had joined a hedge fund in Fort Worth and said, I want you to consider interviewing for a job with this hedge fund in Fort Worth doing merger arbitrage. Well, I didn't know what a hedge fund was, and I barely heard of merger arbitrage, and I'd been to Fort Worth one time, and that was to take the bar exam. But I agreed to interview for it, and I ended up taking the job. So one of the takeaways from this part, this transition I want to share with you is, why did I take the job? Each of you at some point in the future is going to have a good hand, and you're going to get an opportunity to take a career risk, to trade it in for what's behind door number 2. And what needs to be true for you to decide to do that? Well, you get to decide for yourself. I'll tell you what it was for me. First, I had to decide if I thought that was going to succeed. You know, when you buy a stock, you invest financial capital, betting that it's going to increase in value. But it's much more important when you're betting your life and your human capital on an opportunity. So you need to evaluate it objectively. Do you think it's going to succeed? At the law firm, I worked with smart, hardworking people who were very ethical, very good. At this hedge fund, there were brilliant and innovative people. And I said, this group has something special. I think they're going to be successful. Second thing for me that was important was, can I add any value to this group? Because even if they offer me a job, if I can't add value to them, they're going to regret it, I'm going to regret it. So you need to believe you bring something to the equation. And all of these people were different than me. They had math and finance backgrounds, and I was a lawyer, an experienced corporate lawyer, experienced enough to be a partner in my law firm. And they wanted me for a very specific reason, to work in merger arbitrage. But I felt like if I got there, I could help them in a lot of other ways, and that proved to be true. The last thing, and I think this is universally true, is, does the opportunity take you somewhere that you want to go? Like, you could have a great opportunity, it could be prestigious, it could be the envy of all your classmates, but if that opportunity doesn't take you where you want to go, the right answer is no. And I'll go back to when I was a senior in college. I was accepted at Harvard Law School. I had the chance to stay there and do that. That didn't take me where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go back and live in the Southwest. I think I knew I wanted to marry someone from closer to home. So they'd be happy to live closer to where I wanted to live. And so I said no to Harvard and took the scholarship to SMU. In this case, HBK offered me something, it took me where I wanted to go. What was that? There's a, I think, Stanford Business Review article that talks about how people are motivated by different things. And, you know, some by money, some by recognition, some by autonomy. You just want to be left alone, do your own thing. Some by mastery. And for me, it was mastery. Like, I like learning new things. And I had done 16,000 hours at the law firm, not 10,000. And I had mastered it by 10,000. I think that rubric was about right. And I wasn't learning anymore. The future challenges were just going to be about business development, dinners, and golf. And other people might love that. That just takes me away from my family. I want to go be challenged and learn something new. So I said yes. And I told Lori, second time in 2 years, we're going to move to a new city. And I'm going to start a new career. The next phase of my career was 4 years in merger arbitrage. So I don't want to be technical, but merger arbitrage is, I'll compare it to this. You walk into a conference room, and there are 20 couples, and they've promised to marry each other. And they tell you up front, from outside the room, 15 of these couples are going to get married on their announced date. 3 are going to postpone their wedding, but still get married. And 2 are going to call it off. Merger arbitrage is basically deciding which 2 are going to call it. Can you figure out which 2 in the room are going to call it off, or which 3 are going to postpone? Because when mergers close, you make a little bit of money. When they get delayed, you break even. And when they get called off, you lose a lot of money. So it's a fascinating business. It's really very simple at some levels. It's very complex at others. But the best part of the job was that my intuition about my skill set being valuable to this rapidly growing company proved to be true. So there are lots of other challenges that HBK encountered where I was the person that responsibility fell to. We decided to launch an offshore fund. They didn't know how to do that. I managed that project. We restructured the partnership of the then 5 partners of the firm. They didn't know how to do that, so I got the opportunity to do that. And in those exercises, their trust and confidence in me grew in ways outside of merger arbitrage. But there were some weird experiences as well. Like, I went to Moscow with one of my partners in December of 1996, and the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the Soviet Union collapsed, and Russia was experimenting with opening their economy, and there were restrictions on what you could do directly, but if you had an entity based in Cyprus, you could, do this, and so we went over there to see what we could do. There are lots of examples like that of just outside of merger arbitrage, interesting experiences. So I did that for 4 years. I wasn't yet to the 10,000 hours of Malcolm Gladwell competency and mastery when an extraneous event caused me to change roles at the firm. And this may happen to one of you someday. I was perfectly happy doing merger arbitrage, but the founder of the firm came to me and said, David, we need you to drop that and do something else. And the something else was, we had a bunch of convertible bonds, and they were plummeting in price and value because the underlying businesses were exhibiting weakness. And we didn't have a workout specialist. It's clear those companies were headed for bankruptcy, and no one wanted to buy the bonds, so we had to live with them. And we needed someone to manage those positions through bankruptcy. And he said, you're the only one who can do it. Well, okay. The answer is yes. He owns the firm. That's the opportunity. But it was costly. It was costly because 1999, the next year, was one of the best years in merger arbitrage ever. And I would have made a lot of money if I'd been in merger arbitrage in 1999. And you don't get paid at a hedge fund for losing less money. That's not how it works. So it was sort of taking one for the team. And the founder of the firm came to me at the end of 1999 and basically apologized and said, David, I know what I asked you to do cost you millions of dollars, but it had to be done. And hopefully the firm will make it up to you in the future. There's a lesson in that. And I want to bring up this concept of an invisible organization chart. Because every big organization has a formal org chart. Usually you can look it up on their internet. And it has the boxes and the authority, but the employees inside the firm have an invisible org chart. And it's unwritten, but everybody knows what it is. And it's where do you go to get a problem solved? Who can solve my problem? And what cluster of people do I need to bring together to make something happen? And that's not always correlated with the org chart. Because there are people, who have authority but are not leading. And there are other people who don't have the authority, but they're making things happen. And I think you should always aspire to be that person who's perceived by your peers, those under you and those above you, as being willing to solve problems inside the organization. And sometimes, not if you're getting the credit for it, it might even cost you to do that. I promise you, long term, if you do those things, your stock in the invisible org chart will make up for whatever you're giving up short term. And that's what happened to me long term at HBK. Okay, so the choice was work out these bond positions which were broken, or and then go back to merger arbitrage, or try and build a business, a proactive business around investing in distressed bonds, high yield bank debt. And I chose the latter. At this point, I had 4 children and a stay-home spouse, and I wasn't financially secure enough to become unemployed for the rest of my life. And so it was another bet, like all the chips in poker terms. on was this going to be successful. One of my partners, a gentleman named Ken, who's brilliant, younger than I was, very direct, came to me and said, "Hey David, I really hope you're successful at this distressed credit thing. It'd be great for the firm if you are, it'd be great for you if you are. But I do want you to know, if you're not successful at it, there's probably not another job for you here." And, that'd be bad. Well, he meant it, but this led to probably the most satisfying part of my career to that point. Because unlike in every other role where I had someone showing me what to do or it had been done before, here there was no mentor, there was no playbook, just an opportunity to start from scratch, a business investing in distressed bank debt and bonds, and see what I can make of that. And like in poker, again, I don't gamble, you don't get the wrong idea, but like in poker, you start at the $2 table and you get confidence you're not the schmuck. Maybe you move to the $10 table and you just keep raising the stakes. That's basically what happened. We started small and we got more confidence, we built a team, and we started having some success, we expanded the team. And, I'll share by the 5th year, we made over $100 million for HBK, and that business unit was the largest contributor to our profits that year in the firm. The next year we expanded it to Europe, and that was successful as well. Ironically, this is about the time I started thinking about leaving HBK. And here I'd say the tagline is, beware of success. See, I grew up in Little Rock. My dad was a lawyer, worked till the day he died. I didn't know anyone that retired. Literally, I'd never met someone who had retired. I thought you just worked and then died. And so with HBK's success, because the other parts of HBK were doing very well also, and the success of this unit, I was 45 years old, and I was, at that point, financially independent, and I didn't know why I was working if I didn't have to work. I wasn't born to be a distressed trader. That wasn't my vocation. I started, much later than everybody else who was in the industry. In NFL terms, I think I was a solid starting quarterback. Like, my team was lucky to have me, but I wasn't a Hall of Famer at that position. I knew there were people intrinsically more gifted and certainly more experienced than I was. So what was I doing? I didn't know. These were questions I never expected to answer, certainly not in my 40s, but I was restless. And I'd spent, at that point, 8 years in distress. So I was past the 10,000 hours to mastery. I wasn't learning anything new. I was restless. I hired a management coach to help me think through what was going on and either get me more energized and back in the saddle fully, or to decide what I ought to leave and do next. And we'd sort of zeroed it in on the next thing I ought to do should involve people instead of portfolio, teams instead of transactions. But we hadn't figured out what that meant yet. And then another exogenous event happened, and that was 2007. So, did anybody here read the book or see the movie, The Big Short? Yeah, quite a few. So you know from that the subprime market collapsed, and there were a few hedge funds that made spectacular profits in the summer of 2007 when that happened, right? HBK wasn't one of those. Instead, one of my partners had long exposure to the subprime market, and in about 90 days in the summer of 2007, we lost $700 million just in that one part of the portfolio. The good news is we were managing $14 billion. So quick math, it's 5%, just 5% loss. But it shocked our investors, especially when some of our competitors were announcing dramatic profits from the same event. And we decided the mistakes that led to that had directly to do with how we governed ourselves. Because our founder, Arlen, had retired in 2003, and we decided to manage ourselves with a committee, management committee. There were 14 partners, and there were 9 people on the management committee. And that worked for a while. But committees are very good at some things. They're inclusive. But they're not good at other things, like holding people accountable, especially if they're on the committee. And we decided that was part of our problem. We needed a traditional hierarchy with a CEO. And we started talking about it, and I was part of that process, but I still didn't think I was ever going to be a CEO. But I can tell you, because we ran a transparent process, which is part of being a healthy organization, we took a straw poll of 14 partners. Not one person, put me as their first vote. Not one, including myself. Like, our consensus candidate was Ken, this brilliant guy, younger than me, who had retired the year before to do nothing. He wanted to learn Spanish. Like, he just was doing nothing, and so I was sent to New York to persuade Ken to unretire. So, Ken, we need you. For the team, come back. And Ken said, this market is a disaster. I don't know what to make of it, and I'm really happy learning Spanish. And I went back to Dallas and reported on this, and we took another straw poll. And there were several partners more senior and more highly compensated than I was, and it should have been the case that one of them would have become our CEO. But humans being humans, they could not agree among themselves on one of them being CEO. And so it fell to a safe pair of hands, the compromise candidate, which was, me. And it was with that powerful mandate in the fall of 2007, November to be exact, that I became president of HBK. And immediately we encountered the financial crisis. Anybody here see the movie Sullenberger, about the flight where the pilot takes off from LaGuardia, flies into a flock of birds, immediately blows out both engines, and he lands the plane safely on the Hudson? Starred Tom Hanks. That flight wasn't until January 2009, but that's what I felt like from November 2007 until about the end of 2009. Except instead of a really experienced 30-year captain for an airline, I was some guy sitting in first class who they invited into the cockpit and said, hey, can you take the controls? The engines just went out. That's really what it felt like, because in the first year that I was CEO, we went from $14 billion to $4 billion with AUM. And hedge funds get a management fee that's based on how much AUM you have. We also get an incentive fee if there are profits, but there were no profits, because even though we made money in 2007, we lost money in 2008. Just 15%. The market was down 45%. We thought we were doing pretty good, but our investors needed their money back for other reasons. So AUM dropped. Our revenues dropped from $260 million in 2007 to $104 million in 2009. 60%. So my job as CEO in the first 2 years in the saddle was cut expenses by 60%. And that was not fun. At the same time, I had to give our investors a reason to stick around. I had to persuade them the firm was not going to fail. I had to persuade them that our proven investment strategies will continue to work for them, and they should trust us with the capital. So, what does the CEO need to do in that environment? Well, lead. You have to lead. You can't just solve problems. You have to lead. And lead means clarifying why the firm is important to anyone. Why should anyone care if HBK goes out of business? Well, you got to tell your investors and your employees what your mission is, what your values are, and and how you're going to get from a desperately troubled situation to a path back to success that everyone can be proud of. And you need to be passionate about it. And you need to be convicted and take every opportunity to propagate that message and challenge your first team of leadership to do the same. So there's a communication challenge. You have to set the tone, because you can say all the right things, but if your behavior doesn't back it up, no one will follow. So for me, that meant being first in the office, last out of the office. It meant, you know, we moved headquarters during this time. A bunch of people moved from offices, big offices with windows, to smaller offices with windows, and they were complaining about it. So I took an office without a window, just this interior cubicle thing. And I told our head of HR, if anybody wants to complain about their office, send them down to mine. You know, they're just, these are small things, they're silly things, but they matter. They say, look, there's no hypocrisy going on here. If you see what happens to some of our elected leaders over the past couple of years during COVID, the greatest wrath reserved by our citizenry has been for hypocrisy. Boris Johnson basically just lost his post as Prime Minister of England because he was throwing parties at 10 Downing Street during COVID lockdowns he had imposed in London. It's hypocrisy. You know, people smell it, they know it, they won't follow it. You have to lead by example, not just by words. And then you have to care for your people. Everyone knows the expression, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Or the Maya Angelou expression, people will forget what you did, forget what you said, they'll never forget how you made them feel. Right? So you've got to connect to your employees somehow so that they know you care and that you're looking after them. They want to feel taken care of. There are lots of ways to do that. We can talk about some of that in Q&A. I don't want to get too far on my time. But it was a challenge. I'm happy to say it had a happy ending. So it took 2 years, but we got the redemptions to stop. And through a well-timed and well-structured restructuring of our terms, we offered our investors a slight change, but one that made all the difference. And with that change, immediately outflows became inflows. We rebounded north of $10 billion again. It took a few years, but we did. And the great thing is we got to hire back a bunch of people that we had to let go. And very painful. 3 different reductions in force over that time. And so we had some fun with that. So one of the challenges was or opportunities was to talk about, ethics in the CEO and how faith came into play. Well, I've already mentioned that I like to proceed like a young Arthur and feel like I've been put into really bizarre situations, like being turned into a fish for a reason. I just have to figure out what the challenge and the learning is. So my faith sustained me through that period. But I also want to say, at the time that I had the management coach, and I was deciding what's the purpose of my life if I've achieved more than I thought that I was going to, because I just had my head down and was trying to provide for my family. That's when I began to explore my faith more fully. Dean Abella mentioned that I was raised in the Presbyterian church. I was baptized and confirmed as a Presbyterian, but really, I didn't go to church that much after I was confirmed. My mom went every week, said we could go if we wanted to, not. And a lot of times I said not. My parents were divorced and both remarried. And I believed in God, as I've told you already, but I hadn't prioritized answering the most important questions in life for myself. And that's even though I'm a really disciplined person, and I don't know if any of y'all have read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's a great book. I commend it. It has this concept of important, urgent, not important, not urgent. And the important, urgent stuff always gets done. The stuff that doesn't get done is the important, not urgent stuff. Well, when you're young, answering the ultimate questions sometimes can be important, more important than anything else, but not urgent. And I'm embarrassed, honestly, to say that I was raising a family, I had all these setbacks, moved a bunch of times, trying to learn things, 3 different careers, and I just didn't prioritize it. But when I got that management coach, apart from that exercise, I began to dig. And I was like, I need to answer the most important questions. So I was raised Presbyterian. I began reading John Calvin because he's deemed the founder of the Presbyterian movement. So what did he say? And what did he believe? What does that mean for Presbyterians? The other side of my family was Methodist. So I began reading John Wesley. What do Methodists believe? Okay, all right, I get that. I've been going to a Catholic church all these years, faithfully. Not going to communion, just taking my kids and my wife to Mass. What distinguishes what Catholics believe? And I had some wonderful Catholic friends in Fort Worth who, once they realized I was questioning, inundated me. My nightstand became way too full with resources around why Catholics believe what they believe. And it's veneration of the saints, veneration of Mary, the real presence in the Eucharist, the elements of the liturgy. And so I was like, oh, okay. Then I began to read the church fathers. And that's an exercise that causes a lot of Protestants to go over to Catholicism. And Jeff Cavins says that happened for him when he went in the restricted section of the library at his Protestant school. So I read the church fathers, and then I read the catechism front to back. And I don't know how many of you just sat down and read the catechism from front to back. I believe it outside of the Bible. I think it's the most lucid, powerful, clear document I've ever read. It's beautiful. It's a gift. It's divinely inspired. And once I read the catechism, I concluded, okay, I'm going to convert to Catholicism. It's just a matter of time. So that was happening through this CEO journey. So you can give me partial credit for being Catholic, because I converted in 2015. About halfway through my 10 years. Well, I'll offer just one thought experiment on some questions that have ethical dimensions that a CEO may face. We can cover others in Q&A. I told you I had to cut expenses by 60%. Well, there are a lot of ways to do that. You can cut a few really highly compensated people. You can cut a gazillion really low compensated people. You can take every department of the firm and say everybody's got to cut 60%. In our case, we decided we're solving for something which is the highest performing organization that we can create at the end of the cuts that are necessary. That drove a lot of it. But there are other questions as well, because you're trying to achieve an expense reduction goal. We could cut more employees, option A, or we could cut slightly fewer employees and go to the continuing employees and ask them to take a pay cut. Right? What's the optimization there? Is there a moral dimension to that answer? Well, it's hard to hire great people. You don't want to let any of them go if you can afford it, but we couldn't afford it. So we did both. Like we asked everyone in our company to take a pay cut, and the more you made coming into this, the more we asked you to sacrifice through it. But there are other examples. Let me offer one, just hypothetical, which is, let's say you have 2 employees, they do the same job, and you have to cut 2 of them. One is the sole breadwinner for a family with multiple dependents and they have a mortgage. The other is living in an apartment and has no dependents at all. Can you consider that? Should you consider that? Well, these are the questions we had to talk about, right? And I'm happy to cover, any questions that interest anyone in Q&A. I won't dwell on them here, but every single day, questions coming into my office involve ethical dimensions, and I think it's impossible if your faith is central to you to divorce yourself from your faith in answering those questions. It's just part of who you are. It's the starting place that you come from in answering the question. Okay, I want to conclude. You doing okay, Dee? I want to conclude with, because he said, you might wrap up with a little bit of advice for our students, with 3 myths that I think are common, especially among high achievers, with respect to successful business careers, and dispel those and offer you an alternative vision. Very briefly, the first myth is that you need to have a 10-year plan for your career. Most people don't feel that, but especially among high achievers, I encounter people literally have someone say to me, David, I'm going to go to an investment bank for 2 years. After I am trained as an analyst, I'm going to go to a venture capital firm focused on biopharma stocks. And I'm going to do venture capital for 5 years. And then at age 33, I'm going to be CFO of a biopharma company. Well, that's a great plan, right? But none of my Harvard roommates are doing exactly what they thought they were going to be doing 40 years after graduation. And the most successful people I know out of my graduating class at Harvard had multiple unexpected twists and turns in their career, just like I did. So I'd say, forget the 10-year plan, shorten the planning horizon to 3 years, be like a young Arthur, extract the most learning you can out of everything that you're doing, and trust that if you're in a good place, and that looks like it's a good place for 3 years, you'll know when it's time to make a change. The second myth I want to dispel is that you should follow your passion. This is the theme of so many commencement speeches, and I think it's really terrible advice for most people. And I'll say, instead, you should follow your purpose. You see, passion focuses on how you feel when you're doing something, right? It's focused on you. The purpose focuses on your impact on others when you're doing something. It's focused on someone else. And there's no I in purpose. There's only an I in passion. Mother Teresa experienced significant, prolonged spiritual dryness, caring for the poorest of poor in Calcutta. Our feelings about things are too ephemeral to be trusted. My 60-year-old perspective is that a life worth living is built around purposeful activity. And how you feel about that will fluctuate wildly. It might be because of the weather, it might be because of hormones, it might be because of what you had for lunch, or it might be because of something really serious going on in your life. Our feelings are not supposed to be our guidepost. Einstein said, strive not to be a success, but to be of value. Winston Churchill said, we make a living by what we get, we make a life by what we give. And of course, Jesus said, if you follow me, deny yourself, take up your cross. I think they are onto something, and I encourage you to think less about your feelings and your passions in a ephemeral sense, more about your purpose. Be like the young Arthur, trying to find your purpose. The last one is insidious, and it's this concept that highly successful people stay close to perfection, rarely fail, and achieve most of what they achieve relatively easily. It was when my 2 daughters went to Duke University. They came back and were talking about this concept of effortless perfection. Is anybody familiar with that term? Is that a thing? Did they just make it up? I don't know, but it resonated because it's the phenomenon that you can achieve at a very high level with minimal effort, and you should be the envy of all those around you. I think that in an era of social media, where your image to others can be highly curated, this is a persistent problem. I put it in the same category, and I hope I don't offend anyone here, as all the glamour magazines of my generation having exceptionally thin women on the covers, and in the process making so many beautiful, healthy women develop self-image problems about themselves. Because that wasn't natural, or representative, or genuine, or real. And I think social media is feeding this concept of effortless perfection. But everyone that I know who's been successful has had trials, tribulations, difficulties, setbacks, and yes, multiple failures. So as you set about your careers, I encourage you to discard the effortless perfection mirage and be genuine. I think there will be two benefits to you. The first is that because you know it's a mirage, what others are cultivating, you're going to be more confident in yourself because you won't subscribe to the falsehood that everybody else has it together besides you. The second benefit may be even more important, and that is when someone else stumbles, you'll realize, well, it's their turn now. It's probably my turn next. And you'll be more likely to be compassionate and understanding and supportive and help them. So those are my 3 bits of advice. Be like the young Arthur. I'm trying to play in 10 years. Follow your purpose, not your passion. And discard and proactively dispel anybody's attempt to exude effortless perfection. Real leaders want people who are genuine, people of integrity, and that includes people who faith. I think I'll do one more thing, if I may, and that is the most important thing in my life is my family. And I've talked about my career, I've talked about my faith, but if I'm here to tell you about my journey, it would be incomplete if I didn't share about my family. This is a young crowd. I have 4 children, aged 35 to 25. 2 sons and 2 daughters. I encouraged them all the time to be the best they could be, whatever that was, and they all took different paths. So my oldest was a computer engineer, and he went out to Seattle to work for Microsoft on their HoloLens program, which is augmented reality. And now he's with Rec Room, which is a virtual reality gaming company and an app you can get on your phone. My second son went the finance route and worked on Wall Street for 4 years and then launched his own small hedge fund, which has gotten off to a fast start. And it's called Arbitrage. And you can follow him on Twitter. He's very active in the small and micro cap space. My oldest daughter went to Duke, got a master's in theology, and is a Sisters of Life, religious sister in her 5th year in New York. Her younger sister also went to Duke and became a youth minister during the 2 years of COVID, and is now completing her master's in theology and is getting married this June. My wife, 36 years, raised all of them and did a great job, often without adequate help from me because of the demands of my profession. And I read a quote the other day that motherhood is the only profession that matters, and all other professions are in some ways just in service of one. That's how I feel about my wife's profession, which I'm very grateful for. So with that, Dean and Bella, I want to thank everyone for their presence, their attention, and we'll be happy to answer any question on any subject.
Raise a hand if you have a question, and do we have anybody with mics? Okay, great. Yep. So, one right here.
I'm happy to repeat the question as well, if that's simple.
Hi, I'm a freshman finance and sales major at a minor in philosophy. I was working on Capitol Hill last summer, and my biggest takeaway from that internship was that a lot of people who went really, really far in that occupation and in the finance world didn't have a lot of time to spend with their families. Did you, in your experience, have enough time to live on the side when you were still making money and making big strides in the finance world?
That's a great question, because I appreciate you asking it. Perhaps should have covered that in the comments. The short answer is, when I was practicing law, I told you I loved it. A lot of people don't, but I loved it. But there was a cost. I was involved in a transactional practice, and the transactions are unpredictable, and when they come in, they're time sensitive. When you drop everything and you work until they're done. And so I missed my 5th wedding anniversary. I worked Christmas Eve. My family basically couldn't count on me ever. Birthday, anniversary, there are no protected days in my calendar at the law firm. And now, I never worked Sundays. I worked 90 hours from Monday to Friday to avoid working on the weekends. But I traveled a lot. My second year of being a lawyer, I spent 25 weeks in New York. So there are 52 weeks in a year. Every other week I was just gone for a week in New York. I say the greatest gift of HBK to me is not that it made me financially independent. It let me master merger arb and distressed investing and trying to be a CEO. It's that it allowed me to be the husband and father that I aspire to be. I worked the same number of hours, but I could manage them because the hours I couldn't protect were from 8:30 to 3:30 Dallas time. That's 9:30 to 4:30 here. That's when the market's open. Right? When the market closed, it didn't matter whether you got your work done at 4 p.m., 8 p.m., midnight, or 4 a.m., as long as it's done before the market opens the next day. So I went in a lot earlier at the investment firm, and lawyers tend to go in later. But my son, I taught a chess club at his middle school, and I could be there every Friday at 3:30. Middle school football games are Thursdays at 4:30 in the afternoon. I think I only missed one because I was in Japan. So the answer is it was still hard work. During the financial crisis, I would work from 7 to 7. I would go home and I'd have dinner with the family. And then I'd get back on the computer at 8:30 and I'd work till 11. That was extraordinary. That wasn't the average time. That was 2 years of full-on Sullenberger, don't crash the plane crisis. But one reason I left the law firm is that I looked ahead of me. I looked 20 years ahead of me. I didn't see anyone whose life I wanted. And you can decide to run at an unsustainable pace, right? Let's say you can run 10 8-minute miles, but only one 5-minute mile. You can decide to run at an unsustainable pace in your 20s in order to get that training that is available at some jobs that are very demanding, without saying that makes for a good life long term. And that was the case for me. I didn't see partners in my law firm that I wanted to be. And I didn't mention that my dad was married 3 times.
Thank you.
So David, you're saying that you made more money and had a better lifestyle in finance than in the law.
I did, but I spent my 20s in the law. If I'd gone directly into finance at an investment bank, I think that path is equally demanding in your 20s. So, a lot of people come and say, hey, how do I get a seat at the table? In the C-suite, I'm going to be a CFO, CEO, CMO, CIO, CTO. You don't just get the invitation unless your dad owns or mother owns the company. You have to have something to offer. Well, the way you get that something to offer is the apprenticeship that I referred to, right? The 7.5 years of labor. And mine happened to be in the law. That got me an opportunity, but I was wise enough to recognize that
question, it's more of a comment. I appreciate how you spoke about myths for like overachievers, because I know I myself, I consider myself as an overachiever, and everyone always tells me that. And it definitely made me reflect on how recently I even told my parents about how like I wonder what I'll be able to achieve in like 10 years, or not, because right now I'm 18, like what I'll achieve when I'm 28. So it definitely was great advice, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate your comment. Some of the words are at least a little helpful to some of you.
What advice would you have for someone who's considering going to law school?
So, first I would encourage it. What's your major?
Finance.
Finance, okay. So there's an interesting phenomenon in law school, which is the first year curriculum is property, tax, criminal law, and the second year you get to some of the business courses, including tax, corporations, partnerships, and the people who had the liberal arts degrees, who studied in philosophy and so forth, and had great written communication skills when they got to law school, did a little better in the first year, and then what happened in the second year with all the finance majors, or the CPAs, who were in law school, just came like a 400-meter runner from way behind at the tape. So the writing skills are important, and so you need to learn to write. And I went to a good Little Rock Public High School, but when I got to Harvard, I realized I like having a small toolbox. And people who went to Andover and Exeter and so forth, and other really good preparatory schools had a bigger toolbox. And one of the axes was writing. And I got better as a writer at Harvard, but I really learned to write in law school because they force it on you. And so, but the other thing is just know what you want to get out of it. And then the conventional wisdom is law school is really great for people who finish in the top 20% of their class. It is okay for people who finish between 20 and 70, and it's really a questionable proposition if you finish in the bottom third of your class, because it's expensive and the job opportunities are different, scale differently. And so if you go, be prepared to work very hard and be not single-minded about it, but be really dedicated.
Next question. Yeah, in the middle.
Oh, hi. For somebody who's still finding their purpose, how did you know yours was your family? Like, how did that stay consistent?
How did I know mine was my family?
Yeah, that you wanted a family.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for it. The question was, for someone who's still discerning their purpose and their vocation, how did I know mine was the family? The glib answer would be, my wife told me. And there's some truth in that. Actually, she was from a Polish Catholic family outside of Austin, a Polish community, speaking community, Kosciuszko, and wanted a big family, and I wanted the 2.2 kids that the average American family had. So we negotiated before we got married. She wanted, but I think because of my upbringing, my hero is my mom. I didn't share that, but amazing woman. Still living in Little Rock, Arkansas, 91 years old. She's my hero. And I wanted the home that she always wanted to create. My dad didn't really cooperate in that vision, so it changed. But I knew what real love was, and I wanted that, and I wanted a chance to be a better dad than I experienced. My dad was a wonderful man. He did great good in our community. I should mention this in answer to the law demands question is I thought when I got out of law school I'd be the youngest partner ever at my law firm, the best dad and husband ever, and president of the Dallas Bar by the time I was 30. Like that was my vision, right? I realized in about 2 weeks at the law firm that, holy smokes, I'm going to be working all night a couple of times a week. I can't then say, Lori, I want to go to a Dallas Bar meeting Wednesday and Thursday night when I work all night Tuesday and Wednesday night. If I do that, it's like a 3-ring circus. And I realized my energies and talents were adequate. I could succeed brilliantly in 2 of the 3 if I cut one off, and or I could fail in all 3 if I tried to do all 3. And I just told God, I said, look, I'm supposed to give back to my community. I'm supposed to give them my time and talent, but the challenge you put in front of me professionally is all consuming. And family's got to be first, and providing for the family is part of that. I said, if you just let me do these 2, I'll pay it back. Like, just let me take care of, raise my family, and then I'll give it back. And so, once I got my kids grown, and started pushing them out of the nest, I could say yes to more civic opportunities than I would, because it was responsible to do so. And that's been a great pleasure. And one of the reasons I retired last December was I still feel like I gotta pay something back. And I confronted the question, if I can make millions of dollars, should I keep working and give all that money away? Should I do that even if I'm not really growing as a person in the job that I had? And it's so demanding that I can't continue to grow spiritually the way that I want. Or is it selfish to retire? Because then I could give away less money. That's a real question. I wrestled with that for a year. I first tried to retire in 2018. My partners talked me out of it. But I wrestled with that. The family question, I think we're all wired differently. I think in general, we're made to be in community and to leave our homes and form a new family. And I wanted that for myself. And I do know I have friends who have not wanted that for themselves and had a very different life than mine. At times, there were dimensions of it I envied because I had no discretionary time. But I think you'll know.
Thank you.
We are out of time. So what we can do is we'll stick around just a little bit in case anybody has any one-on-one questions, but another warm round of applause. Thank you.
Bro, what is he doing here? What? Oh yeah. Oh, we're so stupid.